Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hapade, Tiro, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. When was the last time you had a conversation with somebody that you kind of or really didn't agree with? Okay, admit it. How well did we listen to what they had to say, knowing we didn't agree with it? Well, our guests today are helping communities across the nation have more reflective conversations. They are from Oregon Humanities, Executive Director Adam Davis and Program Director Jennifer Alkezweeny. Adam, Jennifer, welcome to the Marianas.
Thank you.
How's your visit so far? What brings you here?
We're here for a few days to run a training in partnership with the Northern Marianas Humanities Council with about 18 people from Saipan and a couple from Tinian. And the goal is that not only will folks in the training be ready to go lead conversations with lots of different communities around here, but also that while they're together, they have some of the kinds of conversations that they're hoping to go lead in the communities where they work, worship, live, play, that sort of thing. So that's why we're here.
We're hoping that people will get inspired by our chat today. So when any of these reflective conversations are organized, they'll say like, oh yeah, I remember Adam and Jennifer talking about that, check it out. But maybe start us off with what is a reflective conversation, and equally important, what is it not?
Yeah, I think, it's a unique experience in today's days, right, where we don't typically come together and just talk and hear each other's perspectives. And so a reflective conversation is really that, a space to share ideas, hear each other's perspectives, listen in ways that that doesn't happen sometimes because we're usually in conversation to decide something or get to consensus on something. So it's not a decision-making conversation or one where we're going to vote at the end. It's a conversation really to better understand one another and to reflect on our own perspectives of, oh, I came in with this initial idea, and now from hearing from each other, I'm thinking differently about whatever the topic might be.
Like nowadays it's all about convincing people why they're wrong and why they should believe in us, usually over social media.
Yeah.
Why have a conversation with no expectation that you might be able to convince somebody of your opinion or come to an agreement? Why have that conversation? Why do we need reflective conversations?
Yeah, we operate in the world as if we know things, as if we're sure about why we do what we do. And most of the time, I think there are a lot of assumptions built in. And if we ourselves think, why do I care about this? Why do I care about it with a degree of fervor that I bring to it? There are lots of points where I might not be as sure. And to revisit those can only be good. And to revisit it with people who see things a little differently, but maybe have some of the same shared concerns, like we care about the city we live in, or we care about the school our kids go to, or we care about safety in general, but we have a different idea about how safety is achieved. There's something that's simply good about creating a little more space to understand why someone who might share the end goal but seems to disagree on the details. Well, let's talk about the details, and let's figure out how it is that we can both care about our kids' school but disagree about what the rules should be around what books they read. So it's less about me saying to you, they're going to read that book, and more about understanding where you come from, in part so that over time we can make those kinds of decisions together.
It's kind of bringing to mind a Micronesian saying about passing the betel nut basket, which is, chewing betel nut together is something you do as kind of like a social pastime in a lot of ways. And so this saying, if I understood it correctly, was more like taking time to slow down and have a conversation while we're passing the beetle nut basket, which allows for a great opportunity to hear everybody's perspective. So actually, we're kind of doing reflective conversations before Oregon Humanities.
I hope so. I mean, I think that's actually really important, is that actually everybody knows how to have conversations where we listen to other people, we slow it down a little bit, and what's good about it is hearing each other. Culturally, in the United States and lots of different places, it's gotten harder to have that kind of feeling with people who we've been told repeatedly are a kind of enemy to us, or are so different or so disagreeable that it's not worth it. And I think what we're trying to do is give people tools and confidence to build back something that they know how to do, that we all know how to do.
Why do you feel it's difficult for us to really listen or to be open to hearing the perspectives of people that on the outset we don't agree with? Why is it so hard? Why does the mind start working like arguments against what they're saying? Have you guys learned anything about this in your experience of doing these trainings?
I mean, I think it can be hard for different people for different reasons. You know, a lot of times we're trained to defer to someone else in what they might be thinking. And so then to share your own ideas might feel threatening or hard in different circumstances. And then, you know, if you already come in with an idea of what you think, it can be hard to really set that aside and hear what someone else is saying without trying to think about what's the counter argument or how are you going to get your point across. And so with reflective conversation, what's nice is that we're trying to create the conditions in the room where people aren't coming in with that positionality and that, like, I need people to hear this one thing. So we'll start that conversation one off from maybe the main topic so people can share with each other other points of connection, other things that maybe feel less threatening to share about, and hopefully it's easier to listen because it's unexpected. Where if you're coming in with a topic or framing where it's like, this is really emotional, or you have an idea already, I think people will come in with their preloaded answers. But if you can get them offset a little bit, they're listening then to hear, like, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear this from you, and maybe lean in a little bit more, even like I'm doing now, right? Like, you get excited about it. But I think it's hard because we have values and we hold them dear, and so to be able to talk about them openly is challenging, and to be able to respect someone else's that might feel counter to what we think is hard to sit with that sometimes in a room.
Can I add just a little bit to that? Sure. I mean, we're in a moment where anxiety and insecurity it's understandable that people are feeling that they're feeling anxious about, say, their economic situation. They're feeling unsure if their lives are as safe as they were before, as they could be. There's less trust. We know from lots of different studies and research projects that there's less trust. And when that's the underlying situation, it can be hard to make space for or to open yourself up to people who seem to be part of what you're afraid of. Of course, the alternative is that you get further apart, that you know each other less well, that you're less ready to talk and listen to each other. So the alternative to talking is not talking with each other. And to me, I know which one I'd choose, both because I think it's more satisfying and enjoyable, and because I think it's safer and more effective. Doesn't mean it's always easy, but often it's more easy than it seems like it will be if you can, from the jump, establish what we're together for.
It's good to remember the things, or to realize, consider the things that you have in common with the person, as you were saying in the example of the school. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just one more quick example of that. Oregon Humanities used to run a conversation project, which is a way of getting groups around the state talking, hopefully in the way that NMHC is going to work on. We used to run one called Guns in America. And, that's a lightning rod of a topic, and it shows up differently in the more rural and the more urban parts of the state. But I think the thing to remember is most people want to live in safe communities. We may have different ideas about how to get there, but if we can start by getting people talking about a place in their community that feels safe to them and why, that already builds some common ground, so that as you get further, you're more ready to say, yeah, but it would feel safer if, or it feels unsafe if, instead of just coming in with my pre-rehearsed argument and delivering that.
Yeah, how did that conversation go on guns?
In some places it went really well. In some places it felt very risky to people. And one of the host organizations in a rural part of the state had an experience where a dozen people showed up with guns and an idea that the conversation itself was already invested in persuading them that they shouldn't have those guns. So the day of the conversation was tough. There was feelings of, I would say, some conflict. There was some shame from some community members. The sheriff was there. Some people marched out early. And in a way you could say, tough experience. But the public library that hosted it, which had a hard time with it, then very quickly ended up hosting a series of conversations called Bridging Oregon, the main goal of which was to bring people together from different backgrounds and perspectives to talk about challenging questions in their community. So if the horizon is years rather than 90 minutes, that's a reason to have these conversations that can feel hard in the moment and can build towards stronger community over time.
How do you see these conversations? I mean, that's one example, but how do you see these conversations affecting the communities where they're held?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a muscle that we don't exercise very often, right? This reflective conversation experience. And so I think it's like Adam was saying, the first conversation might be really hard. It might be hard for people to engage, not because even of the topic, but because we're not used to sharing in this way. And so I think the communities that are creating more and more spaces and opportunities for people to come together on a variety of topics, they're training those muscles to be ready for when there's the really hard conversation. And so I see that, libraries that are consistently hosting the conversations, the people that are showing up are used then to talking with one another around topics that might be lower stakes at first. And then when you want to talk about guns, people are used to saying, actually, I disagree with what you said, because they said it when it was something about home or family that maybe might not be as controversial in the moment. So I see that, and then I think just for individuals, it broadens your world to hear other people's perspectives, to not be so entrenched in your own idea. And even the act of saying what you think out loud is different than thinking it only in your own mind. And so I think it helps people be able to pause and think, why do I think this? To have to articulate that out loud is a different experience.
Well, I want to give you an opportunity to share some of the techniques that you're teaching the people who are in your workshop after the break.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
We'll be back after this break.
Looking for resources about Marianas history, culture, and more? Well, check out the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's collection. Our extensive video, audio, and photographic library can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at 670 Humanities. Or check out the written resources on our website at nmhcouncil.org. And for those who prefer a good book, we also have a selection of local publications for purchase. So, dive in, explore, and share your comments as we navigate the human experience together.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Executive Director Adam Davis and Program Director Jennifer Alkezweeny from Oregon Humanities about reflective conversations. Guys, really important part of these conversations are what you call objects. What are objects? Why do they work usually? And why do they work? How do they work?
So we just talked about that in the training this afternoon. So we call them objects. Most people might call them a poem or a short writing or an image, and that's what they are. And they're really just there to help facilitate a lot of different perspectives coming in. So the image might be something that has a lot of things happening, a lot of people in it, or some ambiguity to it. It might have something provocative in the poem, maybe a couple of lines that stand out. And so we use those as a way to have a common experience for everyone in the room to be able to relate to. So everyone in the room has now seen this image versus trying to ask people to share a story that might need a lot of context that not everyone's experienced. So we've all looked at the image together. We all read the poem together. It's an opportunity to maybe come at something slant is sometimes how it's talked about, instead of directly coming into the topic, but to come at it from this other angle where it's maybe a little more abstract to talk about what the person in the image might be thinking and then to share your own experience. And so it helps people just engage in the topic in a way that creates some community, creates a little distance sometimes from what's being talked about, and then is hopefully a springboard to people's actual experiences. We don't want to spend the entire time talking about the poem. It's not an English class where we're analyzing the poem, but it's an opportunity to see the phrases, the emotions that might be brought up, and then translate that into what does that mean for you in your life, and how do you relate to that outside of what's on the page.
Adam, you're really good at this. How do you get people to feel safe enough to open up about stuff that maybe they feel deeply about or that's emotional? And how do you ensure that everyone's voice is heard in a conversation?
Well, first, thanks for saying that I'm good at it. I don't want to argue on air. We can argue later. It's certainly something we try to do. And I think one way is to think, what are the things that make people comfortable in a room from the get-go? And that can be greeting people as soon as they walk in a low-key way, learning their name, sharing your name, and just simply being approachable and connecting about something long before an informal program, formal program starts. It's good to have food in a room.
Agreed.
It's good not to be at a podium, but to all be sitting at the same level. It's better not to have tables than to have tables. It's better to ask approachable questions and to have humor in the room, especially self-directed humor, rather than humor directed at people who might be feeling anxious about what they're doing in this room and what tense thing might be talked about. And then I think the structure of the conversation itself, are you asking increasingly approachable increasingly difficult questions? So you start with the more approachable stuff, and as people are introducing themselves, you're asking them for a word or something short that they can say without risking too much. You're asking people to pair up or get in groups of 3 and talk about an experience they've had that might be shared among the 3 people, even if the specifics are different. And then how can we do this and ask questions that are clear but invite multiple responses? And it's less about me showing my expertise on the subject and more about me inviting people into the room. And that's, I think people recognize when that space is there, and we consistently hear from conversations and trainings, wherever we run them, that the single thing people name that they love about these, most of all, is hearing other people's perspectives. Like, that runs against everything we hear in the news. But it is absolutely my personal experience of having done this work for 25 years, is that there is something about hearing other people's voices, hearing what they really care about, that lights people up.
25 years, you're the executive director, you have a lot of things on your plate. Why do you take this on personally? Why is it important to you?
The way I got into this work was just doing the work, was leading conversations. I didn't know what the organization was that was convening people, and I didn't know what funding went into that organization or anything like that. And what I learned from my initial experiences with the nonprofit world was, first, that there is a nonprofit world, and second, that if you don't pay attention to the conditions that make the program possible, the program will go away. And so I've stayed involved with the parts of the work that I most care about and where I think I probably have the most to offer. And I've gotten increasingly involved with the conditions because I think the work matters. I think our culture needs it. And I've learned through experience rather than deliberately both the importance of working on this and how to do some of that behind the scenes stuff. But what I love is the reason for the operation work. So, yeah, it's a little roundabout, but it's true.
Do you find that all these tools and techniques you train other people to do, that they kind of creep into other parts of your life or your office? I know you've said you spend a lot of time deferring to each other and listening. Like, reflective conversations, do you find it creeping into your relationships? I mean, how deep does this go?
I mean, I think I'm not trying to have a reflective conversation in every interaction with someone, but I do think, even the folks that are at the training, we hope many of them will lead reflective conversations. But for some, there's just some skills that'll transfer into their workplaces or their families. Being able to listen is huge. That's applicable anywhere, right? Being able to ask questions and come with curiosity in interactions with other people. In the grocery store line, the person standing next to you, there's something that they have to say. So thinking about what's a question you might ask people while you're waiting in line versus looking at your phone. That translates everywhere. I think even as an individual, looking at a poem and thinking about how does this relate to my life? In high school or wherever you were in school, looking at a poem might mean something different, or maybe it made you feel a certain way. But there's opportunity to use the things that are happening in the training in all parts of your life without it feeling like you're facilitating other people, right? That it's a natural thing to want to be with others in community and to connect and think about how can I do that in my day-to-day life.
And you reminded me politely a few minutes ago of my age, and so I should just say
I'm sorry. That's not a bad thing.
In a good way. But the reason I'm thinking about it is because, like, I'm in my mid-50s, and I still play basketball. And the reason I'm mentioning that now is because what's good about basketball is when a team's playing well together. Yeah. And sometimes when I'm not playing well, I get frustrated with the other people on my team. I think about what they don't do well, and then I try to do things myself that I shouldn't be doing. When I'm playing well, I'm like drawing out from other people what they do well, which makes me play better and makes our team play better. And I say that because I think that's what facilitation is, except not on a basketball court, but in a room full of people having a conversation where we're making space for us all to sort of show up the way we hope to show up, develop some flow, and then we lose sight of that it's reflective discussion or that it's being facilitated. We're just having the kind of mutual conversation that I think all of us know what's good about.
Interesting. I would say one of the things I've learned in doing these interviews over the last 10 years or so, people really want to be heard. And I think a lot of us, I would say us, feel we're not heard enough. Like nobody's really listening. And so to create that space where, people know that you're really listening to what they have to say, it's very valuable, I think.
And it builds. People start asking each other questions. People start inviting other folks into the conversation. If you can shift the expectations around how we are in a room, it starts to build its own culture. And I think it's a culture that many of our cultures recognize and want more of.
Speaking of culture, I know you've been here to the Marianas, and you've been to the Marianas, Guam, and Hawaii. I don't know if you've been to Hawaii or spent time there.
Just on the flight here. This was I'm having the island tour. Stopped in Hawaii, stopped in Guam, here, and then on the way back, we're actually meeting with our colleagues at the Guam Humanities Council and the Hawaii Humanities Council, but it's my first time on all of those islands.
I'm glad that you were able to spend a few extra days here. Number one, so you could get over jet lag, but also because, it's a nice place to chill out. Is there anything in particular you guys have noticed about the way Pacific Islanders communicate that may be different from the mainland in this context?
Is it all right if I jump in? I know when I was in Guam I felt this, and I'm feeling it again 2 days into a 3-day training. I think the sense of connection to culture, to the culture that people come from, is very strong here. There's real appreciation for the heritage that people are living into, and more than any other place that I can think of where I've led conversations or led trainings. And it's admirable and it's inspiring to see how clearly people are connecting the way they're living to the way the people who lived before them have lived. That's one way. I also think that includes a challenge sometimes, which is if we're thinking about how we want to be, there can be built-in parts of the cultural inheritance that might make it hard to sometimes express that, or for some people to express it to some other people, depending on sort of what the position is relative to each other. And then the third thing I would just say is the hospitality is sort of overwhelmingly warm, which is delightful and instructive from my perspective.
In what way?
Why aren't we this hospitable? Why do we not proceed with that kind of welcome more generally? Why don't we show up with the kinds of gifts and open arms that I very much feel here and remember feeling so clearly in Guam?
Mm-hmm. Not sure. Maybe it has something to do with being islanders. You know, in a small island, you kind of a sense of community.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of ocean around, and when you're in a place that feels safer, you probably help people feel safe. It's incumbent on you to do that, I guess, and we've lost too much of that on the mainland, and so it is, I said instructive, and I meant it. I remember coming back from Guam, and I'm feeling it here really strongly, that can't forget this. You know?
I think there's also, for me, a different relationship with time. I mean, even in the short amount of time I've been here, you know, on the agenda we said we were going to start at 8 a.m. And it's like, well, the building won't open till 8. And so, you know, everything just feels like there's a little squish in it.
Island time.
Island time, yes. And so I think, you know, there's not this like sense of urgency of getting through all the things, and I think that getting through is an interesting interesting phrase that comes to mind when I think about life in the mainland US, is that you're getting through, you're trying to get done to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And I think just like reflective conversations are meant to give some more pause and gracious open space and thinking about things, I feel that on the island, that there's not this, you know, checking in at the hotel desk wasn't this rushed process. It was like, you know, welcome, settle in, where are you from? Like an actual conversation that I don't see happening oftentimes. So yeah, the hospitality is fantastic. I think the opportunity to connect with people as people, and yeah, I guess it is feeling for me because there isn't this sense of like a time crunch or like people are in a hurry. People genuinely seem interested in who you are and asking questions about where I'm from and why am I here, and then why am I doing this training and what's going to happen. Like there's just this curiosity that I'm getting. So yeah, it's delightful, and it's a reminder that it's okay to slow down. That like the point of life is the journey, not the getting through. And so, yeah, I'm appreciating that reminder and seeing how it connects to our work.
Well, I'm glad that we've been able to, you know, help you feel that way while you're here. I'm sure it's something that we would all want you to feel visiting our islands. And now that you've contributed to our islands, you are actually from the islands in a way now. I want to give you time for any final thoughts before we go.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. Second, I want to thank the Northern Marianas Humanities Council and Leo Pangilinan for fostering over several years now this connection across the ocean between the Oregon Council and the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, which we take seriously, and we're honored by the existence of that relationship, and look forward to continuing, and look forward also to staying in contact with the people here that we spent the last few days with. I wish there could be a window into what's going on with that group of people together beyond what we're talking about here, and I hope people will take the opportunity to participate in some of the conversations they lead going forward.
Hopefully, yes, now that they have an idea of what to expect and what it is and what it isn't. Yeah. Jen?
Yeah, I guess I think to echo Adam's thanks for the opportunity to be here and feeling honored in the trust to bring in outsiders to lead people on something as simple as a conversation and to have the opportunity to learn with each other in the room. I've learned a lot about the culture of the islands and the preparation for this training. And I think in particular in this moment in time, thinking about even though we're far apart on the globe, we're so interconnected, and having the opportunity to think about what are the conversations here that are the same back home, and what are some conversations back home that maybe we could have as an influence from our time here.
Very good. Well, thank you both for the work that you do in communities, Oregon, elsewhere, and here. We really appreciate your heart and your wisdom also in a way, your expertise that you're bringing to help us have better conversations. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Our guests today have been Executive Director Adam Davis and Program Director Jennifer Alkezweeny of Oregon Humanities, talking about reflective conversations. If you see a flyer for one coming up, this is your cue to go be curious and have a conversation. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.